still the executive director of AVA Gallery and Art Center. And it is such a pleasure to welcome Gina Adams and all of you here. I will just say a brief welcome, and then Margaret Jacobs, our exhibition director, who did the fantastic hanging of these magnificent quilts, together with our intern Jennifer Lay. Then Margaret will say the more formal introduction of you as an artist. But it is such a pleasure to welcome you back to AVA. I can't believe it is 5 years since you were here. In this beautiful exhibition that we had called Here Now, that featured works by regional Native American artists. It was just an unforgettable exhibition, and so will this be, I know. And we were so very pleased, and we have followed your amazing career since then, and that you were willing to come back from Colorado, from Boulder, Colorado, to be here to send these powerful broken treaty quilts to share with us. And as you know, we featured this, the one that is on the back of that. Featured it on the cover of our publication for fall and winter. When you exhibited here in the fall of 2011, you had a series of encaustics on the series Mapping Landscape. And they were totally mesmerizing. Not only that, but you also gave workshops in encaustics, and what that has done. I don't think you are quite aware what an impact this has, but you planted the seed that is just continuing to grow. It has brought such an interest in encaustics, and it continues to do so. And in our new sculptural studies building that is under construction right behind here, we will also be able to offer encaustics. And you just told us something very beautiful, namely that you are going to donate to us some of your encaustics equipment, so we can continue to offer that as classes. Our best hope, of course, is that you can come and teach some again. But regardless, we are so grateful and so delighted to see you here again, Gina. Thank you and welcome. And here's Margaret.
Gina Adams spent her early youth in the San Francisco Bay Area and her adolescent and early adult years in Maine. She received a BFA from the Maine College of Art and an MFA from the University of Kansas, where she focused on visual art, curatorial practice, and critical theory. Gina currently resides in Colorado and is a faculty member at Naropa University. Adams' work is exhibited extensively throughout the U.S. and resides in many public and private collections. Recent exhibitions include solo shows at the University of Southern Maine Galleries in Portland, Kemper at the Crossroads in Kansas City, Missouri, and the Newman Museum in Overland Park, Kansas. In 2015, Adams received the Smithsonian Artist Fellowship Award. This fellowship gave her the opportunity to work with Smithsonian museums, research sites, collections, and scholars so that she could conduct research to inspire and create new artwork. The series of digital prints currently on view are inspired from this fellowship. Also on view are 5 quilts from her Broken Treaty Quilt series. This series speaks to the broken treaties that were written by the United States government and signed by Native American tribes. Adams states, these pacts promise the tribes money and power in exchange for the rich land they called home for possibly thousands of years. The government took the land, however, the tribes were left penniless. My greatest hope is that these quilts inspire a moment of healing and prosperity. There is no room for broken treaties. Please join me in welcoming Gina.
Thank you. Awesome, thank you. I want to just say thank you to Margaret and Venta and Jennifer for installing. Thank you so much. And I also love to just recognize ancestors of this land for thanking them for allowing me to be here, and the energy of having this work here I think is really important for making change. Change is happening as we speak with the pipeline and the DAPL protests, and I have many friends there right now. So I am very thankful for their efforts in making change for our environment. What I didn't know when I started is how involved this would be. Originally it was an idea, which I'll talk about in my lecture, but originally it was an idea just about seeing if I could do it. And it took me a while, the first one, but the more I get done, the faster I'm becoming and the more help I'm accessing as well. I have many assistants. So I love to start with saying, Anin Anishinaabe Nagidao Gidojigwe Na. My name is Gina Adams. I am of Ojibwa Lakota descent. My history is also that. I'm also a immigrant, American, Irish, and Lithuanian. So I'm like this melting pot. Throughout my whole youth, I had no problem identifying myself with being Irish and Lithuanian. It was the Native American side, my Ojibwa grandfather, where I spent my summers and my vacations, that held strong in my heart. And there was always a piece that I felt like I continually wanted to explore. In my research, I often wonder, well, maybe I should go to Ireland. But I have too much work to do. I just haven't got there yet. So I start with this image. My grandfather, when I was about 7 to 8 years old, took me to the still water, and he threw in a pebble, and he said to me, he wanted me to pay attention to the ripples, that the ripples made by that rock were the same as the ripples I would create in my life by what I chose to do, by the actions I had, the relationships I had, and the purpose of my life. So I have always had that in the back of my mind, but often, like I'm about to do this with my 8-year-old niece and nephew right now. This is really important, to just take ownership of who you are and be the best person you can be. So this is my great-great-grandfather, Wabanekwa, and I want to show you this. What I'm showing you today is all of my, like the thread of Smithsonian research. I'm not showing you all of my work, I'm just showing you like where it started, what I did, and there's going to be a lot of images, so I'm going to try to go through them pretty fast. But if you have any questions, feel free to ask me. So in 2002, I had graduated from the Maine College of Art, and I was searching the internet, and I just thought, I wonder what will happen if I put in my great-great-grandfather's name. Now my grandfather, I grew up in southern Maine, spending time with my Ojibwa grandfather, who was sent to Carlisle School, who migrated to Maine after being in the Navy, and started like an organic farm nursery. He was sort of a self-taught horticulturalist, not really so self-taught, I found out through my research. Carlisle trained him to be a horticulturalist. So I had this information of the names and the language. We would go for walks and he would tell me who my ancestors were, their name in the language. That was it. I didn't get another name or an alias or anything like that. So I Googled Wabanekwa and I found this image, and it was held by the Smithsonian Museum. And then I saw that, yes, he was from White Earth. Yes, he was, he was from everything connected. And then I contacted the Smithsonian and I said, I really want one of these images. And they said, well, that will be $50. And I said, did you pay my great-grandfather? Like, I'm really curious. Like, I don't want to pay $50 for my ancestors. So I just copied and pasted it, you know, in my computer. But that was the opening to my fellowship, which is kind of cool. So I started doing research on Carlisle School, and this is a photograph. This is actually not attributed to Choate, who I studied his photographs in the Smithsonian collection, but I think it is a Choate. So John Choate was the first official photographer for the Carlisle School. And I don't know, do any of you know about the Carlisle School? The Carlisle School was started by Richard Henry Pratt. He was a United States Army commander, and he decided he wanted to do something to make some sort of assimilated change or annihilation change. He was in the Indian Wars as a fighting Army commander, and he didn't see that as being successful. He then had this bright idea that changing the children, removing the children, and changing how they felt from an early age would make the change, would remove the Indian but save the man. So this is an example of a Navajo, a young adult Navajo going into Carlisle, and when he left, when he graduated. So I've searched for images most of my life, trying to find connection, visual identity of my family. When I graduated with my undergrad was when I really started throwing myself into it. When I decided to go to the University of Kansas, because it was ancestral land and being in the plains, that was also close to Haskell Indian Boarding School, which is now the only 4-year accredited Indian Native American university in the country. I started going into their archives and finding photographs, and this was the first one I found, and I quickly thought it was really interesting. They didn't tell me any background or history, but 3 years later I was a professor at Haskell, and one of my students' grandfather had been photographed like this because he continued to speak his language. So they made them dress like little girls, and they called them the Haskell babies. So it's interesting, you know, if you just look, it looks like an idyllic photograph, but there's always like a double meaning, or there's always more history behind what actually is there. So in my thesis year, that's your piece? Yeah. In my thesis year of graduate school, I did this whole group of embedded photographs, trying to hide through a thicker layer of encaustic the photograph, so the identity of the person was, the spirit remained, but the identity was maybe not so noticeable. And I started making coil pots for each one to honor them. So that's an embedded photograph on panel, embedded with encaustic, and then a coil pot that I hand built with a just skin thin layer of encaustic. So then I graduated from the University of Kansas, and I'm kind of going over a lot of bodies of work here, but I'm trying to get to the essence so that you can understand where the quilts come from, why the letters. So after I graduated from the University of Kansas, I went down to Key West for a residency, and while I was there, or just before, this happened in Alabama, where a high school team playing another high school team wrote this big banner and put it up in the town at the game, "Hey Indians, get ready to leave in a Trail of Tears round 2." So it was all over the papers, and of course, after it was all in the papers, the school was very embarrassed. They apologized. They said they didn't understand what they were doing, blah, blah, blah. But I thought, here's an opportunity. So, and my husband always says, be careful what you tell the artist. There's power there. But I went to this residency, and it was June in Key West, and it was a monsoon almost every day, which was fine. I was like in this beautiful little studio of Key West building that I was in. And I started hand cutting out these letters. And the letters are Gaudian old style because they resemble letterpress type from the Wild West Indian newspapers that were talking about all the things about the ravages of the West and the trains being built. And so I wanted to have some sort of historical significance. But these are banners. They're 3 foot by 5 foot. And on one side are, like this one's inherited memory, blood trauma, broken treaties. And then on the other side, on the other side, you can see it's a silhouette of a presidential seal from the presidential peace medals that the chiefs were given when they actually signed the treaties. You'll see them both sides in a little bit. So when I went back to my studio, I was still living in Lawrence, Kansas, and my studio was my home. I started cutting out this quilt. So it's about July of 2013. And over the course of several months, I was slowly cutting. And when I started actually stitching it onto the quilt, Bruce Hartman from the Nerman Museum actually got in touch with me, and he said, "How long until you can have 7 done?" And I think it was September or August. I said, "March?" And he said, "Ooh, no." And I was like, "January?" And he goes, "Yes." And then I was like, "Oh my gosh, how am I going to do that?" This took me months. But I actually hired assistants, and which was great because my Haskell students also helped. So this was the first quilt. That is the back of the treaty, or the front of the treaty, the back of the quilt, and this one is the same quilt, the end of the treaty on the front of the quilt. So I chose color calico fabric. Incidentally, calico fabric was the first commodity made in the United States to export for sale to Europe and other countries. And one of the first mill factories was in Dover, New Hampshire, and I had no idea when I lived here. Like, I had to move to Kansas, and then I found that. So this is a detail of that treaty. And then, so the Nerman gave me 2 large galleries in the museum, and one of them was 19 basketballs that have encaustic on them, the banners, and then I wanted to honor the chiefs who actually signed the treaties of the quilt. So this is an embedded photograph of a chief from one of the quilts, this one right here, who actually was forced to sign the treaty and given a piece medal. And I, again, wanted to embed the photograph so that you couldn't stereotype who he was. You couldn't stereotype the man he was. Maybe I want the spirit of who he was to remain. And the spirit of the promise that was made in his signing. And convincing his people to sign. So this is one of the encaustic basketballs I did. I started with these peace medal seals, and this represents George Washington. Now, he didn't actually sign any of the treaties, but he started it. It was his idea. He put it in motion. Jefferson. Actually, and what looked like bones on the side, I was actually, while I was making these, I was gifted a peace medal, and I traced the beads, and hence, I made a stencil out of them. So these are ceramic. I made a cast of an NBA regulation basketball. It has encaustic, which is beeswax infused with tamar resin. Heated onto the ceramic, and then I scribe into it, and then I fill it with oil. So this was the installation at the Nerman, and you can see those are the basketball treaties, and that's actually silhouettes of the peace medals, the handshake, the signal, which was significant for the promise. If we are friendly, we're going to honor these together. And so, massacre is murder, rejection becomes alcoholism and addiction, historical trauma, blood trauma. All of these things are the effect of what we've inherited as descendants 300 years later. We still have these effects. We are not naturally, we don't have a natural inclination to these things. They are part of us. In my research at the University of Kansas, I had this group of post-colonial theory, native, indigenous artists from all over the world, and these were our discussions. We had the same histories, we had the same feelings, and so the statements on the back of these quilts relay that, and they're meant to have an impact, and they're meant to be strong, because we should be able to talk about these things, and we should be able to change history and right wrongs. So these were the basketballs. The whole exhibition is now at the Center for Great Plains in Lincoln, Nebraska. I'm in a show called Contemporary Indigeneity. So these are 7 quilts in the Nerman Museum. And then I'm bouncing a lot ahead because I have like 60 images to show you. So when I was at the Smithsonian, I wanted to see John Choate's photos. And the first photos I found, I looked at photos 10 hours a day, 4 days a week, for 3 weeks from this Choate collection. And a lot of them were small. I was looking at them through loops. I was trying to decide, do I want a high-res image? What kind of impact? I had no idea what I was going to do with these images. What I was really struck with initially is he actually photographed the space in the light. And I thought these were really quite beautiful. This is actually a shoe, like millinery, training people to make shoes, training the natives to do useful skills, what they deemed useful. This is a letterpress shop. This is the gymnasium, and I thought this was really haunting, these images. When I started doing the basketballs, I would have people say to me, Native Americans don't play basketball. Why the basketball? And I thought, are you kidding? Like, athleticism is so strong in every Native community. It's a way to build community. It's a way to make your body stronger. It's health. You can get an education, and then you can bring all that goodwill back to your home and share it. And then it just, the goodwill reciprocates. This was a really fun image of the gymnasium. And they had these crazy knockers that looked like bowling ball pins, but I guess were for exercise. And this is the bandstand with some of the graduating students. So I started looking at these photographs that ran from about 1867 to about 1915. And while I was looking at them, like like the hands, the laying of the hands, like there were certain things I was looking at that I thought were really odd, really a little too familiar, like these two white children with hands on the native students' legs, like what was that all about? And then I started noticing like these cheesy backdrops, you know, like let's make this look European and refined. But the carpets, there was something about the carpets that I really made notice of, but I didn't know why I would until a little bit later in my research. So thousands of these images, thousands. I literally watched children grow up. Literally. It was pretty amazing. This child actually has tears in his eyes. And then I was able to read the accounts of what was happening in the school, the amount of deaths, but also the amount of parents that were coming to see their children. And every time a parent came in, they would photograph them. But sometimes the parents came in to see them, but they were also part of delegations to sign treaties, so they were there on official business. And then they took advantage of their being there to do like these photographic opportunities. And then they would sell these as poster cards, like at the World Fair and everything, to support the idea of Carlisle. And then what became almost 300 sporting schools around the country. And in the next like 50 to 75 years, there was quite a number of schools. Only 2 are still operational, and Carlisle is a museum right now, owned by the Army, which is interesting. So notice the carpet, and then this is Spotted Tail and Iron Wing. They had children there and siblings. This is another. Noticing the hands, noticing some of the artifacts, like he has that hatchet with the heart in it. I was trying to find that in the collection. I think the NMAI has it, so I'll see it in December. So then I was like 2.5, almost 3 weeks just looking at these show photographs, and I had this 1-hour commute from my Petland Airbnb on the metro down to Suitland, Maryland, to where the archives are for the Smithsonian. And I texted Gina Rappaport, who's the photographic archivist, and said, okay, can you find anything of my great-great-grandfather from Wabanekwa, from White Earth? Can you find anything? I wasn't even 15 minutes on the train, and she's like, oh my gosh, I have so much for you. And this was one of the first images. This is my great-great-grandfather's cabin when he was first moved to White Earth Reservation. So this is the first cabin. Look at how many people. Like that's all family, although I don't know who they are specifically, but I don't know if they all even lived in that one cabin. They might have, but I don't know. So here he is right here. And that jacket is really kind of interesting. Definitely wondered what that was from. More family, all from White Earth. So when I looked at these, I saw, my mother said when she saw this image, oh my God, that's me when I'm a little girl and my father. What I discovered in the research was that White Earth wasn't the home. It was just one of the places they could go to. There were 6 different reservations. They were originally the Chippewa of the Mississippi. The Mississippi through up to Huron and Superior, and they were migrating people. And then when the reservation system was put into place, they had to choose. And each reservation had different qualities: fishing, farming. But my people traveled. They traveled to do ricing. They traveled to do maple syruping or fishing or hunting. They didn't stay in all one place. And so to have to stay in one place didn't work. And there were several things that I read about the resistance of actually relocating, and how some of the people were actually looked down upon by their own people and by the government, because they became these renegades. And this is Mija Gijiguk, who is my great-great-grandfather's brother, who is a bit of an elder, who is right upper right-hand side. And then he's also with Frances Densmore. And this is him right here. So Frances Densmore was an anthropologist. She was trained in like music folkways. She was a musicologist, and then she spent a lot of time for the original BIA, which was the first it was the early Smithsonian, so she actually did research underneath another male anthropologist. Of course, she was female, so she had all her own writings, and they wouldn't publish them. They wouldn't give her a lot of credit. But now there's thousands and thousands of pages of her writings that are actually coming forward, and people are doing research and publishing on her right now constantly. And when I was in grad school, I had done a lot of research. So when I found out she actually spent 10 years with my people, it was like rock star status. I thought, this is so cool. But also what that meant from a research standpoint was that I could connect everything. I could find her writings, all the artifacts she studied, or all the processes, or the farming, or the rice farming, and the maple gathering, the canoe building. She documented everything, and everything is in the archives. So I was able to see them in the photographs, even the bundles and the maple syrup containers and the ricing tools, and then be able to then go into the archives and actually hold them with a gloved hand and actually spend time with them. It was really, really wonderful. So this is Misha Pijiguk. He's showing the Midewind ceremony. They were recording it, so the sound recordings I was actually able to listen to at the Library of Congress and the Folkways Museum. They have all of her sound recordings.
What years were those two?
They were like 1967 to 74, or 1867. Did I say 1867? Yeah, so I did listen to a few days worth, and I'm going to go hear more. There's like months worth. And there's paper sound recording, so it's very staticky, but it's really quite cool. So this is Francis Densmore and Shapiz. And then this is another relative who I just thought had such like cool, I just love this person. I don't know their name, I just know they are a family member, they were part of the tribe, and I just fell in love with this person. And then this one actually really resembles, like I can see resemblance. And it says file print across the front, so most of these are all glass negatives. So I was looking at reproductions that were, were exposed in a dark room, and I can get really good prints if I want to, but actually there's something about the file print and the historical connection that I think is really wonderful. He was a badass. He refused to go to any of the reservations. He was continuing to hunt and fish on his land. Because he was so hard to pin down, his own people actually became a little bit afraid of him because they were afraid of the repercussion that they would have. But he, for like 40 years, just continued to be his own person in his own way. So I thought that was really pretty great. And here's Wabanekwa again. So when I arrived in DC, I started cutting a broken treaty. But I didn't plan out. I brought a cutting kit with me and all the fabric. I just didn't plan out which one I was going to do. So I landed on a Saturday night and I thought, I think I want to look at the White Earth Treaty. I think it's time. And what I realized was that 149 years, almost to the day or the month, he was in DC negotiating the treaty for the tribe. And that's the treaty. So I started cutting the treaty that my grandfather, great-grandfather, was fighting for his rights of his people. So I really felt like that was so important, and I have a lot of gratitude for everything I found. And this is another relative that a lot of names were not kept as clearly as they could have been, and the way they're spelled in Ojibwa is probably wrong. So my next step is to take all of my research and go work with my language elders and ask them to help me with the right spelling, or to see if anybody else has any like oral tradition memory of these people. I want to piece it back together. What's so cool about this guy is he's holding a little pistol, which I think was really fun. But he also, like, the vests are these little mirrors, and the archives has these, and on the back side are tobacco tin advertisements. I had never seen them before, but I'm actually thinking about bringing that into my work somehow, like the advertisement on one side, mirror, like bling on the other. And so my grandfather, of the names he told me to look for Jean Boulou. spelled B-E-A-U-L-I-E. My younger son's name is Bo. I didn't know why. So this is Jean Ballou. He was an Indian agent. He was the one that took the children from the reservation areas to Carlisle. So I only found this out because he's also in a delegation photo. And there is some documentation of what his job was for the US government. And this is a delegation photo. And these are all Ojibwa. In the upper left-hand corner is Charles Wright. Charles Wright is Wabanekaw's son. I watched him grow up in the Carlisle photos. I didn't know he was his son until I came to the delegation photos, and he was attributed to being Wabanekaw's son. But there I found probably like 2 dozen photos where they are together in the photos, but he became a minister reverend and then was also an Indian agent. So he was, a lot of these children of Carlisle grew up, and then their job was to then help to sign treaties, help to remove land, help to remove children. Like they had jobs, specific jobs, and they were trained to do things like this, but they were also very uncomfortable with their identity and not sure where home was. So this is an example of my time spent in the archives. One day I'm looking at photographs intensely, and I look up, and there's this giant polar bear being rolled by the windows. And it was huge. That happened every day. Something really cool like that happened every day. Really fun. There was a giant cougar and leopards, and this is one of the pods. So the archives at the Smithsonian in Suitland, Maryland there's the MRC, which is the Natural History Museum Cultural Anthropology Archive, and in this building are four pods stacked 4 high. Each floor is a football field. And in that, these are like cabinets. Each cabinet has its own light switch. And the first day I went in with Candace Green, who is the director of the Natural History Museum and the MRC. She just started opening cabinets, and one of the first cabinets was full of something I knew I wasn't supposed to be looking at, and I just felt it's like whoosh. Like I said to her, please shut that cabinet. I am not supposed to see this. And she did, and then from then on we decided that she and I would either look together on the computer archives, because there are millions and millions of artifacts in the collection. So to just open a door is kind of dangerous. But she was great. She was really wonderful. So this is another one of the pods, and that's one of the carts. Like we had to drag carts to every. They're like 10 feet tall, those cabinets. So there's like 4 drawers in every cabinet, 4 or 5. So you have to have carts. This is an Ojibwa Minowin rattle with human hair. And those are elk. I believe no. What are they? Oh, that's what they are. What do you call them, Paulette? Dewclaw. Okay. They're big. Like, yeah. Thank you, Paulette. But I fell in love with like the surfaces and the carvings on the wood, and this is an example of one of the beadwork pieces I found in the collection that was really beautiful.
Could you say where geographically the clothing is made?
Well, so here's what is sort of an issue. We don't always know. Like, they don't always know. Because from the time when the Smithsonians were being formed was the time of the relocation of tribes to reservations. And that was when the Smithsonian also had the most money to send scouts out to gather and buy and bring back. So it really just depended if they were notating them correctly, and mostly they didn't. Mostly they were just like grabbing, and let's make this major collection. But nothing's really attributed correctly. They're trying to do that now, but the Smithsonian since 1947, I believe, hasn't had much money to collect, and they also are a very small group. What I learned is that there's 2 curatorial directors, 2 assistants, and they get interns in the summer. Wow. It's not very much. And so I was really fortunate to have, they were all basically working for me for 5 weeks. That's pretty.
The entire Smithsonian or for
No,
this
those,
particular
just the
study?
MRC.
Oh.
I go back to work with the NMEI in December, so then I'll work with a different group of people. But to open up their knowledge, their databases, their archives was really, really amazing. I have such gratitude. It was an incredible experience, but I kind of learned about it along the way as I got to know everybody, and Candace started telling me these details. I thought, geez, I'm pretty lucky to be here. So this is a birch bark maple gathering basket, and you can see it has pitch on the side. And then I really wanted to study birch bark, I thought in the beginning of the research, but then, I was really just open to where the research would go. But these are all scribed like I scribe into my encaustic. So then I started finding this beadwork that had weird things on it. Like on one side this says OBR, and on the other one it said BRO. So it was like backwards, like somebody made this for their brother, so OBR, BRO was interesting. And then this patterned beadwork started just presenting itself to me. And I asked Candace about it. Not the one on the lower with the floral, but the one in the middle with the blue. And I said, this beadwork is sometimes, I see it in other collections, it's often attributed to many different cultural identities of people, but it always seems like it's mismarked. What is going on with that? And she said, well, the thought, the current running through anthropologists in the last 20 years, and right now it's right on the cusp, but nobody's doing research on the fact because they have bigger things to do research on. She said, we believe it's the patterns from the carpets and the photographs of the boarding schools and the delegation photos. So the children went to these schools, were removed, continued to do their beadwork, but then the patterning they used was what they knew. So I kept this in the back of my mind, and Candace said to me, I said, well, why don't you write about this? And she's like, oh, we don't have time. We don't have time, and then someone will try to disprove us. She said, that's why we want artists coming in. So I kind of thought, okay, all right, careful what you tell the artists. I'm going to think about this. So that's another example, and another. So then, when I came, I was there for 5 weeks, and when I came back, I had all of these photographs, some pretty major deadlines for 3 shows for the quilts, and I thought, I really want to do something to honor the photographs. And I started thinking about the beadwork patterning. I don't do beadwork. I have watched a lot of beadworkers making beadwork, but I'm not. What's that?
You said yes.
I feel like it's not for me to do up until this point. I have commissioned beadwork from friends, family. So my idea was to take the color of the beadwork I researched and the patterns of the carpet and make these digital prisms in the computer based upon that, and then literally cut out the ancestor and place it into the digital ground. So that was my thought process. And because I was in such a deadline, I hired a former student of mine who's so fantastic. And he worked with me all summer with this dialogue, and we were constantly working together and doing proofs until we got it exactly where I thought was definitely what I wanted. And I wanted to do something new to honor the experience. And in a way to thank the Smithsonian for letting me in as well. And this set of 6 is probably going to be collected by the Library of Congress and maybe the NMEI. So it's kind of a win-win. And I love that I'm doing something new. It just feels right, and I feel like I'm honoring my ancestors. And I'm grateful for the sacrifices they made. I'm sorry that they had to make such sacrifices, but I'm willing to do anything I can do right now to make sure that any of this work I do is actually educating people of the sacrifices that they made, and the brutality that this country has put on to people with my heritage. These are my ancestors, but they could also have there could be millions of people in this country now that they're also ancestral connection and have no idea. So I always end This was the last one of my quilts. This is in the Nerman collection now. But my last body of quilts I ended with home. We always return home. And home is in our hearts. Thank you.
Gina, how did you choose the backgrounds for these? For example,
Well, each one I wanted to be a little different, and each one represents a beadwork from the collection.
okay, all right.
So, and there's only one repeat actually, just because of time. That's similar.
Oh, I see this as well.
Yeah. Yeah, it was just because of time, but I'm going to do a second grouping of these probably in December.
Why did you feel the basketballs were well?
Well, first of all, I wasn't trained as a ceramicist in undergrad. I wanted to create a power object that would talk about assimilation. And I felt the basketball, because if you're a good athlete, you're assimilated into any culture, no matter where you came from. So I made a mold of the NBA regulation basketball. I chose the encaustic and then the oil on the surface because I didn't want to glaze them. And I'm an encaustic artist. And I'm a printmaker, so the scribings are printmaking.
But you said you filled it with oil.
Oh no, I scribed the surface. So I first put the bisque-fired basketball, I put the encaustic on the surface, and then I scribe into them. We did that in the workshop.
Yeah, I just misunderstood what you said.
I do.
Did you pour oil into the basket?
Yeah.
Well, maybe that's my next work. Maybe that would be perfect. Wow. Talk about the pipeline. Good Lord.
That's true.
Jeez. Wow. Thank you. How are we? Does anybody else have any questions?
Well, I was just going to say, you must have had many moments when you were going through all this 10 hours a day, thousands of images.
Yeah.
What made you, you couldn't have had an equal focus on each and every image, but there must have been moments that really brought you back to your ancestral past and really had some kind of spiritual power that made you really look. Can you recall any of that? Or?
I felt like I was there for not only myself, but my students from Haskell and my friends and the many people I know who started saying to me a year ago, here's my lineage, will you look for my people? So it wasn't just myself. I felt like I was also looking for others. And I was looking at loops. I threw loops at everything, hands, eyes, features. I was paying very little attention to how everything was marked because I knew things were marked wrong, incorrectly. And I thought I was looking for my grandfather. What I didn't know is I was looking for like a great uncle and siblings. I didn't know who I was looking for, but the emotions I felt were intense. And Candace said to me one day, I really feel that we're supposed to provide gloves and all the accoutrements so you can photograph, but we also need tissues. There were days it was just streaming down my face, like uncontrollably. Like there are all these scholars there working and talking about how much they know, and me, I'm just sobbing in the corner looking at these pictures. But I photographed everything, and I have lists of what I will want to get in high-res images. I do have to buy them. I'm going to write a grant. That will be a bigger project. It'll happen or not. We'll see. But I kept really good records. And Shane Goshorn, who was a SARC fellow 3 years ago, I believe, actually gave me a lot of clues on how to archive it because she told me it would be really overwhelming. It was. But I had a lot of support, and I could take as many breaks, and it was really I was self-productive. Like I didn't have anybody telling me how to be productive. But it was really overwhelming sometimes. But then I would take a break and come back. And those grounds, if you ever have a chance to go, any of you, the MRC grounds, you go through these gates, and there's sculpture everywhere, and wild geese, and these greenhouses that look like the city of greenhouses. and pathways and gardens. It's really pretty. So you could go outside and take a break, or you could go have lunch and like Joe Horse Capture would be there and Neil, her mini horses, and they'd just be eating lunch, bologna sandwiches or something. It would be very low key. So I just, you know, it was like pretty heavy, and then every day I was so busy coming back to my room and cutting letters, because I went back to my Airbnb room and I cut letters every single night. So it was just pretty busy, but yet I just tried to find balance, I guess.
Haskell these days, what's the educational?
It's a 4-year accredited Native American university. You have to be tribally enrolled. And I taught there for a year. I would still be there if they had a full-time position, but they didn't.
The same kind of education as
No, they have American Indian Studies, they have pre-law, American Indian law, they have treaty rights and law. So a lot, when I was doing the first quilts, I had PhDs working with me, like really counseling me on what to look for. And I found this great series of books by Francis Paul Pruka. He documented all the treaties, did extensive writing on them. So, and there's like, you know, everything that, there's business and tribal government, early childhood education, pre-nursing degree programs, biology, like they have a pretty good educational system. But, you know, the students, it's not free. There's this whole misnomer in this country that if you have Native American descent, you can go to university for free. That's not true. There's, you know, I can't even tell you how many times some of my own cousins want information because they want to go to school for free, and I'm like, start writing grants. Do some research. It's not true. But Haskell students do have to pay for their education. Not as much as in other places. But they do continue on to get master's degrees and PhDs. It's a good school.
Could you talk a little bit about making the quilts and the letters? And you said you worked collaboratively, so I was wondering how you chose a given color.
Okay, so the quilts, I've been collecting antique quilts for a number of years. Even before this project, I had like this stash of these antique quilts, which I have used all of them up now. But so I have the quilts, and then I choose the treaty, and then I start choosing fabric just as you would make a quilt top. So I want the fabric to have a color connection and have the simultaneous like stimulated like color recognition thing that happens just when you pass through, but I pass through from one color to the next. So I actually numbered them. I have squares of the fabric, and the first letter is cut, the fabric's flipped over. So that's how each one is its own kit of fabrics. And I actually do these little samples and lay them on the quilt top before I even start to see if they all work. And yeah.
So it's kind of like printmaking too.
Yes.
Like reaching for the.
Yeah, definitely is printmaking.
But each has a unique palette.
Right.
Each word. It's great.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I'm working, these are not perfect quilts. I don't want them to be. They have holes, they have stains. I don't want them to smell like mothballs, but I have found how to get rid of that air, just the air. I put them outside for a week and then that's gone. It's good. Yeah, so I want them to be worn and have holes and be aged. Some of them, I have received quilts as gifts that are really, really too damaged and torn up, but I've passed those on to other artist friends like Natalie Ball, who is Chilkett from Oregon. She's now at Yale. And another friend who's down at Airmont right now. And they cut them up and do other things with them, so. Yeah. Yes?
I'm looking at them, I think of Glenn Magon.
Yeah. Thank you. Wow.
Things that are there and not there,
Yeah.
to read and not read, and making strong statements about his past.
Yeah.
Is there any influence of somebody
So
helping you these?
I definitely, while I was in graduate school, I did study a number, Glenn included, that actually were hybrid artists, so they were trying to mix the message. I don't know if I'm answering this correctly now, but I studied that quite a bit, and then I just started doing these. So I think there is a thread of connection, and I definitely do want to do that. This language is confusing. It was meant to be confusing. I want it to continue to be confusing, but I want it to make change. I want it to be political, but I want to entice the viewer in, maybe to change history or change their idea of what history was. Am I answering your question?
And they're all broken treaties.
Yes, they're all broken
It's not
treaties.
like they were broken and they're still broken, and you're sort of talking
Yeah,
about.
well, they're still broken. I mean,
Yeah.
the pipeline, the Yankton Sioux Treaty, I did that treaty in my first group of quilts. It's now at the Great Plains Museum. That land right now being fought for the pipeline, and there's 70 tribes there right now fighting for it. That is that treaty. I didn't realize it when I did it, but it's pretty significant. Yeah, they're all broken, and they were meant to be broken. What was it you said earlier? I'm sorry, this is so simple. You said assimilation, relocation, assimilation, annihilation.
The three paths of the Dogs Act.
Right.
Which is on our federal docket to completely eliminate native populations
Right.
to the American government. So, yeah, depressing.
Yeah.
But you're still here.
I'm still here, and I'm actually not that depressed. I'm empowered to make some change, so I'm not depressed about
But
this.
blood potions still work.
No,
People are
they don't. They don't work. Yeah. And I don't have tribal recognition. I refuse to get tribal enrollment only because I think it's a form of apartheid. And whenever I'm asked for it, I say thank you, but no thank you. Like, I don't need to be part of it if you need enrollment papers, so. And they usually change their minds.
Well, one thing I was thinking about with the Carlisle photographs of the students is I did a little bit of looking into the Hull House, Gina and Adams, and about the same time, and there was that, work that they did with taking immigrants and teaching them skills.
Right.
And it's so interesting to me and so ironic that they're taking what is the most essentially non-immigrant population,
Right.
and treating them as if they're immigrants. And but that Hull House, and
It was training them to do work that,
so interesting.
training them to do work that no one else
Yeah.
did, and that's still happening.
Yeah, but it was an era that
Yeah.
was so specific, certain kinds
Yeah.
of work.
Right.
Yeah.
And my grandfather continued to do that work his entire life that he was trained to do. Yeah. And he was proud of the fact that he survived. He was a survivor. He was proud of that. He called it white man's training school. He was proud that he had done well. He was proud he was able to work hard and buy land and support his family. He was very proud of that. They were not wealthy, but they survived. And his children didn't have to face the injustices he had to face. And that was significant. So, thank you. Thanks for all your questions. So I think we have to do a quick musical chairs here.
So everybody please stay for the opening reception. We have 5